Hello friends, welcome to the latest content of my developer series blog, a ride management application designed for trucks or service vehicles. If you recall, in part 1, I gave you a brief demo. Part 2, we covered how to set up UI UX default, routes, data model, error validation, spinner, messages, etc. In part 3 and part 4, we implemented functionality which toggles from dark mode to light mode. At the same time, we made our app multilingual. In today's blog, we'll write code related to user authentication. We are going to write the code for sign up, login, logout, reset, and forgot password. And we are also going to discuss basic CRUD operations code. Before we jump on and write any code, I want to make sure that you have already installed Parse Server SDK. If not, please go back to this video playlist and watch video number 2. There I have discussed how to set up your Flutter environment and how to copy your Back4App application ID and server key. Alright, couple of more housekeeping items before I open the VS Code. First thing is, whenever we write the code, I want to make sure that we'll never call backend API directly, except in some cases, and we'll go through that what are those cases. Otherwise, every backend API call will be a cloud function, which we are going to discuss in next videos. Second thing is, always authenticate and validate every single HTTP REST API call. Again, we'll go through that, what it does mean. Third thing is, keep all the backend API calls in a separate directory or service folder. This helps when you want to refactor your code later on. And last but not the least, please make sure that you never pass the direct value in backend API calls. Always use data models, etc. And we'll go through that. What are the advantages of using data model and what are the advantages of using, backend API calls. So let's see, what do we mean by data models? So we have already covered this topic in video number 2, but just to recap. So here, as you can see in the signup.dot file here, first, we are going to have a couple of data models. So here I'm using two different things. First, let's focus on the login data model, which has the two values, email and password. Again, instead of directly working with the values, say email and password, always work with the model. Let's just rewrite the code to make it more clear. So for example, first form we want to do in signup.dot file, we are going to create a form key. Now this form key will be included in the form widget later on. And next thing what we want to do, let's go create two text editing controller, one for email and one for password. All right. Next thing we want to do, as you can see, this email controller, we are going to include this email controller into the text editing fields over there. So text editing widgets. All right. So as you can see in user form, we have a form widget and we are going to pass two things. Key is equal to form key and the auto validation mode, which is on user interaction. Okay. Now on the actual text field. So for example, the email field, email input field, we want to say controller equals to email controller. All right, so that's why we mentioned that email controller equals to text editing controller. Now let's go create a couple of the data model. So instead of working on that email controller or email text box input field directly, we are going to create a model. So login data model equals to model, which is of type login data model, and it has two fields, email and password. So email is equals to just say any blank value here and password equals to NA. Now, again, so whenever user inputs some things to that email field or password field, instead of passing those values directly to any function, what we want to do on change, we want to take the value and we want to update the model. So we have created an instance model, which is of type login data model. And here simply I'm going to do model.email equals to value. Same thing, so that's how you update that. That's why I meant to say, when you say never, pass direct value into backend API, always use the data model directly. Okay. So, and you will see the advantage of using data model in the long run. All right, now let's write the code which calls the sign up functions here. So I'm going to, so there are two buttons available. One is sign in with the Google, and we are going to cover that later. Actually, it calls the same method, say set data. And there's another button. So once the user puts the email ID and password, there is a sign in button. Once you click on that button, it calls a function which sign ups, which does call the sign up. So here, let's just go call this function as a set data, and we are passing the value email here. Now let's go define a function called set data. Before we do that, let's define another function called send message. So I'll come back to this, what this send message does. So void send data, but actually what send message does, whenever user signs up, you want to send a welcome message to the user email. That's all this send message does. So, and we'll write the code to that later on, but it's not important. So in the set data, because set data is called from sign in with Google or sign in with the email button. So that's what the login type actually refers to. So inside that, let's call the toggle spinner functions. So what do you want to do? Because this is a async function here, is going to call the backend API. So we want to show a spinner. We have already covered this topic in the past, but basic idea is show the spinner, do the backend API call, and once the backend API call is finished, then toggle the spinner off again. All right, so that user will see that okay, something is happening. So toggle spinner, and then we will call a function called, let's call declare a variable called user auth, and if login type equals to Google, then call a function on the backend API called sign in with Google, and if login type equals to email, call another function, say authblock.sign in with email. And this is, we are doing it because we are just using one single function for both the buttons. All right, so now because these two functions, sign in with Google and sign in with email, let's go to the, again, I keep on referring to that, never write that direct backend API code in the actual dot file itself. Always create another file and keep that file in a separate folder, say something like block, and put all the backend API related code over there. All right, so here I'm just simply calling that function, and if that function returns success, you want to send that message. So user.auth that success, then send this message. Otherwise, you want to send that another, saying, you can send many messages, and then if not, then you just want to show another message saying, what, something went wrong. All right, so that's all you need to do in this file. So now remember, these functions, sign in with Google and sign up with email, does not exist yet. So let's go to your, again, we are going to write all the actual backend API related code in one single file. So go to your directory, say blocks. So again, inside the lib folder, you will see a folder called blocks, and all the backend API related code that I have put it in one place. So here, let's say auth.block. Now let's go create this function, say sign up with email. All right, so as you can see, sign up with email accepts the value, say model, which is of type login data model. So sign up with email, let's pass this model as a function here, as a parameter. And then because this is an async function, so let's mark this as an async function. And here simply I'm just going to, retrieve the value from that model. So again, it's not necessary because but in this case it is. So because it is a simple, especially in the authentication related method here, I'm doing it here. Otherwise, I just throw it at the backend and let backend figure it out what the model is. So username equals to model.email, and here in this case, because my username and email ID is the same, I'm just putting those as the same. So password equals to password. So final user equals to, and then simply we just call the parse user. And when you are calling the parse user, if you see the signature of that particular function here, it accepts 3 different parameters: username, password, and email. And once you declare that instant of that parse user class, simply what you need to do, user.signup. So signup is a built-in method on that parse user class. Similarly, you will see other methods, say login, logout, reset, forgot password. That's the beauty of working with this parse user SDK. There are very user-friendly methods available out of the box. So simply like reset password, you will see that later. You do everything else is the same, and then once you declare that user, which is an instance of actually parse user class, so simply you call the request password, say reset or forgot password. These are the functions available out of the box here. All right. So I think that's pretty much it. That's all you need to do to sign up. So let's go back to our blog here, and here, as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, all you need to do, create an instance of the parse user class and call up all of this method, request password, reset, or logout. All of these methods you can directly call on that user object. All right, so let's see. Now next topic we want to cover is about how to secure routes. So basically here what we want to do, what if your user is not signed in and he directly put the URL of your, somewhere in a browser and try to access the page, and he is not even signed in. So we want to prevent that, prevent that from happening. So let's go create a function called isSignedIn. Similarly, we are going to create an instance of that parse user class and call the function, say current user. And if current user equals to null, simply you say false. So that means user is not signed in. And now let's put some another checks here that user session token is actually valid or not. Sometimes it happens that user is signed in and user session token is not valid anymore. And the reason you want to do that in the backend, suppose you want to log out some user from the backend itself. So that's when you can log it out from the backend and your user code will execute here. So isSignedIn function, as you can see, it checks the current user, and it also checks the session user token is valid or not. Now go back to your signup.dot file here. Let's create a boolean variable, say is user valid, and we by default is false. So first time when you create that, we just assume that user is not signed in. And now let's go inside that init state function. Let's go create a load authentication function here. And inside that load authentication, all I want to do simply is an async function, and I'm going to call that is user signed in function what I just created. Now, if this returns true, what we want to do, the boolean variable what I just created, we want to toggle it. So let's go back here, is signed in. Let's go to signed in. Again, as you can see, it's the signature of this function here. It's returning true or false. So if it is returning false, that means user is not signed in. And if it's equals to signed in, then it's going to return true. So depending on that is signed in function, we are going to pass that pass sign in state to this variable what we just created is user valid. So now we know that user is valid or not. That means user is signed in or not. So and that's all it takes. It's a very, very simple method. And simply now we have this particular boolean variable, and we can use it anywhere inside our application on this app, especially on this page. So for example, simply here child equals to user form. Simply what we want to do, if user is already signed in, you don't want to show him the form again because user is already signed in. So here you can see if user valid equals to true, then show him some other page saying settings page which says, hey, go back to the dashboard because you have already signed in. And if not, then all you need to do, show him the form which asks user to sign up. So that's how you authenticate, like your user. You display pages because depending on the user authentication state. All right. So as you can see, if you go through my GitHub repository, you will see that I have used a single authentication method everywhere else in the application. And I also created some other functions here, but the idea is once you define this function at one place, you just everywhere as page, settings page, sign up page, login page, write page, everywhere I've used the same code over and over again. Now let's go cover one last topic here, doing the CRUD operation. Here I'm not going to write the code exactly because I know that I'm going to refactor this code later on. But let me just show you a glimpse of what that code looks like. Write ... What actually happens here, once you are creating a write, once you submit the form, all it does, it takes the value of that model and then goes to the backend and creates or update that collection. So here the set write function, as you can see, simply what it's doing is calling another set write function, which is defined at the auth block level. That means at the backend level. And here, as you can see, I'm calling a parse object. I'm creating an instance of that parse object class, and I'm just doing the data.save. Again, I'm not going to go through the details of this particular method again because this is not recommended. This is what I wanted to mention, that please do not write code like this. Do not call the backend API directly in your application. Instead, always use the cloud function. So we are going to refactor this code, and we are going to change this to cloud function in later videos. All right. So, but for now, because this is still in the development state and you want to test it out that your code is working or not, it's okay to write this code for now. But plus, so again, it's a simple code. As you can see, it's just like, creating an instance of the parse object class and simply RUD data.save. So as soon as you hit that data.save, what it's going to do is going to take all the model values from the data you passed, and it's going to create a collection. That's all I wanted to cover in this video today. I hope you find this useful. Thank you.